My name is Hannah Cole. I'm 32 years old, and if you had told me a year ago that I would be sitting on a quiet, sun-drenched balcony in Bali, listening to the distant hum of the Indonesian Ocean while my family's entire legal reality imploded across the world, I probably would have laughed. I would have thought you were describing a scene from a movie, or maybe one of those sensationalized internet stories that people read to escape their own lives. But reality has a strange way of catching up to you, especially when you spent over a decade pretending that the cracks in your family's foundation were just minor design flaws. Pour yourself a cup of coffee. Seriously, take a moment and sit down with me. Because if you have ever been the child who had to constantly earn your place in your own family, if you have ever been the one who was quietly expected to set your own life on fire just to keep everyone else warm, then this story is for you. It all started exactly 3 weeks before my brother Daniel's wedding. I was sitting at my kitchen counter in San Francisco, working through a routine compliance audit for the investment firm where I work, when my laptop chimed. It was an email from Daniel. The subject line was completely blank, but there was an attached PDF titled, quite formally, Conditions for Attendance. At first, I genuinely thought it was some kind of elaborate inside joke. Daniel was 35, highly charismatic, and possessed a very specific, sharp sense of humor that he used whenever he wanted to disarm people. He was the kind of person who could walk into a room of strangers and leave with 3 new business leads and a weekend invitation to a cabin in Tahoe. So I laughed, shook my head, and clicked open the file, expecting a satirical list about dress codes or mandatory dance moves. Instead, my screen filled with a coldly structured, numbered list of 5 non-negotiable legal and financial demands. And at the very bottom of the page, typed out in bold, black letters, Daniel had written, "Complete them, and maybe you'll be worthy of standing beside us." But the real twist, the thing that made the air completely leave my lungs, wasn't the document itself. It was the CC line at the top of the email. Our parents, Elaine and Richard, were copied on it. Neither of them had called me. Neither of them had texted to warn me. In fact, just 11 minutes after the email landed in my inbox, my mother had replied to the entire thread. She didn't question the demands. She did defend me. She simply dropped a single heart emoji and typed, "Please don't make this difficult." Have you ever experienced a moment where a single sentence suddenly rewrites your entire childhood? In that exact second, looking at my mother's heart emoji, the illusion I had carried for 32 years completely dissolved. I realized that my role in the Cole family was never to be loved unconditionally. My role was to be useful. I was the stable one, the predictable one, the daughter with the corporate finance career, who could always be counted on to absorb the damage so that the family dynamic could remain perfectly, beautifully comfortable. Daniel's document wasn't an invitation. It was a bill. He was demanding a wire transfer of $30,000 into a wedding escrow account within 72 hours, claiming it was my fair family contribution for his luxury Napa Valley wedding. He was demanding that I sign a formal legal release, permanently forgiving an $84,000 restaurant loan I had given him years ago, a debt he had systematically ignored. He demanded that I surrender my late grandmother's sapphire bracelet, a piece left explicitly to me in her will because he had already promised it to his wealthy fiancée, Sophie, as a family heirloom. And the final conditions were purely designed to humiliate me. I was ordered to wear a specific unflattering taupe dress chosen by a stylist, attend the luxury weekend entirely without a guest, hand over my phone before the ceremony, and sit at a table right next to the kitchen service entrance because Daniel claimed he was terrified my bitterness would contaminate the atmosphere or cause uncomfortable conversations with Sophie's high society relatives. To top it all off, I was expected to stand up during the rehearsal dinner and read a prepared script apologizing for my past jealousy, publicly stating that our financial conflicts were just a misunderstanding and praising Daniel as the successful, generous son our family had always pretended he was. I sat there in the silence of my apartment, my hands perfectly still on the keyboard. My family expected me to cry, to call them screaming, to beg for a compromise, and eventually to swallow my pride and comply just to keep the peace. That was the old script. But as I read through those 5 conditions a second time, something's inside me didn't break. It clarified. I closed my laptop, walked over to my closet, pulled down my dust-covered suitcase, and booked a one-way flight to Denpasar, Bali. Before you listen to what happened next, tell me, where are you watching this from right now? What time is it where you are, and what is the weather doing outside your window? Does it match the mood you woke up with today? I'm truly curious to see how far these words will travel, because sometimes hearing how someone else finally walked away from a lifetime of manipulation is the exact permission a stranger needs to do the same. To understand how my brother felt entitled to send an email demanding my submission, my inheritance, and my hard-earned savings, you have to understand the specific ecosystem of the Cole household. Every dysfunctional family has an architecture, a set of invisible pillars that hold up a false narrative. In our house, the central pillar was the survival of Daniel's ego. Daniel was 3 years older than me, 35, and for as long as I can remember, he possessed an almost supernatural ability to deflect the consequences of his own actions. If he failed a class, the teacher was biased. If he lost a job, the manager was threatened by his vision. Our parents, Elaine and Richard, didn't just love him. They protected his potential like it was a fragile glass sculpture, while treating my stability as a durable, utilitarian concrete block that could withstand any amount of weather. If you have ever been the sibling who was called strong or independent as a way to justify why you were being ignored, please type the word invisible in the comments right now, because that is exactly what it feels like. You are praised for your resilience only because it makes it easier for your family to heap obligations onto your shoulders without checking to see if your back is breaking. I learned the true cost of that dynamic when I was just 17 years old. It was 2:00 in the morning on a sticky June night when my phone vibrated against my nightstand. It was Daniel, sobbing so hard I could barely make out his words. He had taken our father's beloved Ford pickup truck after drinking at a graduation party, misjudged a sharp turn, and backed it directly into a neighbor's decorative stone wall 3 blocks away. Instead of staying, he panicked, abandoned the smoking vehicle on the side of the road, and ran home. "Hannah, you have to help me," he wept into the receiver, his voice cracking with a terrifying desperation. "Dad will throw me out of the house. Mom's blood pressure is already dangerously high this week. If she finds out I was drinking and driving, it'll kill her. You know her heart can't take this kind of stress." That was the weapon they always used. Our mother's fragile health. I was 17, terrified and deeply conditioned to believe that keeping the family peace was my sacred duty. So I snuck out of the house in the dark, walked down to the truck with him, helped him limp the damaged vehicle back into our driveway, and when the morning light brought our furious father into the kitchen, I stood there and let our parents believe that I had taken the keys for a midnight joyride. The fallout was immediate and severe. I lost my driving privileges for 6 full months, spent my entire senior year walking to school, and worked every single Saturday at a local dry cleaner to hand over my paychecks to cover the costly body shop repairs. Daniel, wrapped in the safety of his room, hugged me privately and swore on his life that he would repay every single dime once he got a summer job. He never did. In fact, within 2 weeks, he had completely blocked the incident from his memory, participating in dinner conversations about my reckless, rebellious behavior with a look of gentle, pitying disappointment on his face. That was the blueprint. Fast forward a decade, and the stakes got much higher. Daniel had dropped out of community college, moved through 3 different uninspired career paths, and suddenly decided he was destined to be a high-end restaurateur in Sacramento. He didn't have capital, a business plan, or culinary experience, but he had charm. Our parents immediately called me ecstatic. They told me that refusing to back his dream would permanently destroy his fragile confidence, just as he was finally finding himself. By that time, I had spent years pulling 70-hour weeks, climbing the corporate ladder to build a highly stable career as a compliance manager for a top-tier investment firm in San Francisco. I lived frugally, invested wisely, and kept my finances entirely private. But because I was successful, my family automatically assumed that my wealth belonged to the collective. They spoke as if my savings accounts were merely an emergency backup fund for Daniel's whims. Against my better judgment, but desperate to keep our parents from branding me as the cold, selfish daughter, I agreed to loan him $84,000. However, because of my training in compliance, I insisted on a formal, notarized written repayment agreement with an explicitly stated interest rate and monthly schedule. Daniel laughed it off, calling it a formality between siblings, but he signed it. He made the scheduled payments for exactly 4 months. Then the excuses began. First, it was a broken commercial refrigerator, then an unexpected payroll tax, then a slow winter season. By month 7, the payments stopped entirely, and my polite inquiries were met with icy, defensive silence or long texts accusing me of tracking his blood money like a heartless corporate vulture. The restaurant collapsed entirely after just 14 months of operations. True to form, Daniel blamed everyone but himself. The greedy landlord, an unreliable head chef, rising supply costs, unfair negative online reviews, and bureaucratic delays at the local permit office. He conveniently failed to mention the brand new luxury sports car, leased directly through the business's checking account, or the lavish, closed-door private parties he hosted every single weekend where his friends drank thousands of dollars of top-shelf liquor completely free of charge. When I told our parents that I was preparing to hand the contract over to a collections agency, my mother wept on the phone for 2 hours, urging me to forgive the debt because Daniel was starting over, and a lawsuit from his own sister would break his spirit permanently. I didn't sue, which was my ultimate compromise to preserve the family peace. But I refused to legally forgive the debt. I let it sit there like a cold, unspoken border wall between my brother and me. And for 2 years, peace in the Cole family simply meant that Daniel stayed comfortable and coddled while I silently swallowed an $84,000 financial wound. Everything changed when Sophie Langford entered the picture 2 years later. Sophie was incredibly polished, fiercely intelligent, and came from a family that owned a highly successful chain of commercial construction companies spanning across California. She worked in brand strategy, carried herself with an effortless grace, and seemed genuinely kind. But from the moment they started dating, Daniel carefully controlled exactly what she knew about his financial history. To Sophie and her wealthy parents, Daniel spun a masterful narrative. The failed restaurant in Sacramento wasn't a reckless disaster funded by a betrayed sister. It was a minor, calculated setback that provided valuable market experience. He painted our parents as independently wealthy elites and he described me not as his lender, but as his passionate financial business partner who had willingly invested $84,000 into his visions. Because I believed in his brilliant. None of it was true, of course. But my silence had allowed his lies to grow. When Daniel and Sophie announced their engagement, the wedding quickly snowballed from a small, intimate vineyard ceremony into an incredibly lavish, multi-day luxury weekend in Napa Valley. There were custom-engraved invitations, imported European flowers, a live string quartet, private chauffeured transportation, and a grand reception hosted at a completely restored historic estate. Whenever our mother called to describe these extravagant arrangements, she spoke with a breathless pride, dropping hints as if Daniel was personally funding half of the event. I knew for a fact that Sophie's parents were cutting the checks for the vast majority of the wedding, but Daniel repeatedly claimed to his friends and future in-laws that he was fully covering his side of the family's expenses. He had built a pristine, fragile house of cards out of his own ego, and as the date drew closer, the wind started to blow. 2 months before the ceremony, Daniel casually pulled me aside during a family dinner and asked me for a $20,000 short-term bridge loan. I looked him dead in the eye, didn't say a word, and firmly refused. He didn't yell or throw a tantrum. Instead, he just smiled, nodded, and smoothly said he entirely understood. That calculated smoothness should have terrified me. It meant he wasn't desperate. It meant he already had an alternative plan. 3 weeks later, the conditions for attendance email landed in my inbox. As I sat in the quiet dark of my apartment, staring at the cold text on my screen, I forced myself to stop reacting emotionally. I am a compliance manager. My entire professional life is dedicated to looking past what people say and examining exactly what they put in writing. I opened the attached legal document. The formal release Daniel demanded I sign before I would be permitted to attend his wedding. The first page was standard, albeit offensive, language erasing the $84,000 restaurant debt. But as I scrolled down, past the standard legal jargon and the boilerplate text, I reached page 4. And right there, buried in the middle of a dense, single-spaced paragraph of tiny font, my eyes caught a specific clause. The sentence read, "The signee hereby acknowledges, ratifies, and approves all prior, concurrent, and future financial commitments, agreements, or obligations made by or on behalf of the Cole Family Wedding Project partners." I read it once. I read it twice. My corporate training kicked in, and a cold shiver ran straight down my spine. The language was deliberately, dangerously broad. Daniel wasn't just asking me to forgive the past $84,000. He was trying to force me to legally bind myself to something I hadn't discovered yet. He was setting a trap, and he was using the emotional leverage of his wedding day to force me to step into it. Without replying to the thread, I immediately forwarded the entire email and the PDF attachment to my best friend Mia Torres, with a single line, "Tell me I'm not imagining how wrong this feels." Mia called me back exactly 4 minutes later, and she didn't even say hello. Mia had known me since our freshman year of college. She was someone who never confused my silence with weakness, and she worked as a senior corporate accountant for a major firm. Hannah, her voice was sharp, tight, and completely devoid of its usual warmth. "Do not touch a pen. Do not reply to that email. And under no circumstances do you give them a single word of warning that you are looking closely at this document." "You see it too?" I whispered, leaning against my kitchen counter. "See it?" Mia snorted. "Whoever drafted page 4 of this release didn't write a family agreement. They wrote an indemnity trap. If you sign this, you aren't just letting Daniel off the hook for the old loan. You are legally declaring that you have reviewed, authorized, and taken equal financial responsibility for every single contract, debt, or line of credit opened under the wedding project name. Hannah, look at me. Why would your brother need you to retroactively approve wedding expenses that he claims he's paying for out of pocket? There was a heavy, suffocating silence on the line. Then Mia asked the one question that changed everything. When was the last time you pulled a comprehensive credit report from all three major bureaus? I had not checked my credit report in months. Working in investment compliance, my focus was always outward, monitoring corporate portfolios and ensuring regulatory alignment for high-value clients. My personal financial life was pristine, automated, and predictable. Or so I blindly assumed. While Mia stayed on the line, the heavy silence between us only punctuated by the rhythmic tapping of my fingers. On the keyboard, I logged into the primary credit verification portals. My mortgage statements were perfectly normal. My credit card balances sat exactly where I expected them to be. I was just about to sigh with relief and tell Mia that perhaps we were overanalyzing a poorly worded internet template Daniel had found online. Then my eyes drifted to the bottom of the log, checking the deep history of inquiries. There it was. A formal business inquiry from a specialized commercial lender I had never heard of, let alone contacted. The inquiry had been logged exactly 6 months earlier under a corporate entity titled Cedar and Stone Events LLC. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. With freezing fingers, I quickly pulled up the California Business Registry database and typed the company name into the search bar. A single document populated the screen. Daniel was listed clearly and boldly as the sole managing member. My name did not appear anywhere on the public registration. But as I scrolled down to look at the primary business address used to establish the corporation, my breath caught in my throat. It was the address of my old apartment in downtown San Francisco, a place I had lived in for 4 years, a place Daniel had visited dozens of times, and a place where he routinely watched my cat whenever I had to travel for international compliance conferences. He had systematically used my historical data, my physical location, and my identity to build a corporate ghost. Mia, I whispered, my voice completely hollow. There's an inquiry 6 months ago, a company called Cedar and Stone. He used my old apartment address. Call an attorney right now, Mia commanded, her conversational tone completely evaporating into professional urgency. Don't scream at your mother. Don't text Daniel. This isn't a family fight anymore, Hannah. This is a federal crime. The next morning, I bypassed my usual routine and went straight to the offices of Priya Shah, the sharp, meticulous contract attorney who had originally drafted the $84,000 restaurant loan agreement for me years ago. Priya was a woman who commanded respect the second she walked into a room. She didn't deal in emotional narratives. She dealt strictly in verifiable evidence. Priya took the documents, reviewed the conditions for attendance email, and spent exactly 10 minutes analyzing the broad release clause on page 4. She didn't look shocked. She looked intensely focused. With my formal written authorization, Priya contacted the Risk and Fraud Department of the commercial lender listed on my credit report. 2 hours later, we received the digital application file. They confirmed that a substantial business line of credit had been approved and fully issued, with me formally documented as the primary personal guarantor. The original lending limit was $100,000. But because the payments had initially been kept current, using capital injected from another source, the limit had recently been extended to an astounding $117,600. And according to the bank's transaction history, nearly every single penny of it was completely gone. Priya arranged an emergency secure video meeting to walk me through the scanned application papers. As the pages flipped on the screen, I felt a deep, sick sense of betrayal settle into my stomach. The application contained a perfectly clear, scanned copy of my signature. It included detailed corporate tax documents and personal financial statements that I had securely given Daniel years ago when we were establishing the original restaurant loan paperwork. It even featured a fraudulent corporate operating agreement stating that I owned a 30% stake in Cedar and Stone Events. I had never heard of the company until 24 hours prior. But the transaction history told the real story of where that money had gone. There were massive, recurring payments to the luxury historic estate in Napa Valley. There were wire transfers to a high-end floral designer, a private luxury transportation service, an elite diamond jewelry boutique, and the specialized digital agency that had built Daniel and Sophie's glamorous wedding website. Worse still, there were direct, substantial transfers from that business account straight into Daniel's personal checking line to cover his monthly Porsche lease and his luxury condo rental. Daniel hadn't just built a beautiful wedding out of thin air to impress his wealthy new in-laws. He had funded his entire lifestyle, his ego, and his marriage by quietly placing a financial noose around my neck. And that 5-condition email? The demand for $30,000 was designed to instantly cover the heavily overdrawn business account before the wedding week arrived. The demand that I sign the release was a desperate, cunning attempt to get me to legally ratify the fraud, making it impossible for me to claim identity theft later without implicating myself. While Priya was explaining the technicalities of how the forged guarantee would complicate an investigation if I signed it, my phone buzzed on the desk. It was another text from Daniel. "I know you opened the email," it read. "Mom is already incredibly stressed out about the catering details, so don't punish her with one of your classic, dramatic silences. Sign everything tonight and wire the money tomorrow. If you refuse to support your own family when it matters most, I'll personally make sure everyone in our social circle knows you tried to sabotage my marriage just because no one has ever chosen you. If you have ever had someone use your own single status or your independent lifestyle as a weapon to make you feel fundamentally unloved and broken, take a deep breath, because in that exact moment, looking at that text, the pain didn't hit me. The shame completely vanished. Daniel depended entirely on my fear of public conflict. He expected me to protest privately, cry in my room, and eventually surrender to protect our mother's feelings. I quietly took a clean screenshot of the text, dragged the file into Priya's secure legal folder, and looked up at her. "What's the play?" I asked, my voice entirely steady. Priya offered a cold, satisfied smile. "We don't fight him in an inbox, Hannah. We build the cage." Over the next 48 hours, I moved through my life with a quiet, calculated precision. Daniel expected a frantic, emotional negotiation because that was the behavior pattern our family had trained me to provide. Instead, I gave him an absolute vacuum of information. While he and my parents interpreted my silence as a sign that I was slowly breaking down and preparing to comply, I was sitting in Priya's office, executing a total financial and legal extraction. First, I executed a comprehensive security freeze across all 3 major credit bureaus, ensuring no further accounts could ever be opened in my name. I systematically altered every single financial password, updated my security tokens, and formally notified my employer's legal and compliance departments that my personal data had been compromised in an active identity theft investigation. With Priya's direct guidance, I completed a federal identity theft affidavit and filed a comprehensive police report for grand forgery and corporate fraud, specifically detailing the unauthorized guarantor documents for Cedar and Stone events. Then, the storm of family pressure arrived exactly as predicted. My mother called my phone 6 times in a single afternoon. As I watched her name flash on the screen, I didn't answer. I simply listened to the voicemails as they populated my visual log, watching her tone violently pivot from superficial sweetness to weaponized, maternal outrage. In her first message, she claimed that Daniel's aggressive conditions were simply a necessary precaution, because I had been so cold and unsupportive of his relationship with Sophie. By the third voicemail, her voice was tight with anger, lecturing me that loving families don't keep petty financial scores when someone is trying to build a future. Her final message was a weeping, desperate guilt trip, demanding to know how she had managed to raise a daughter so utterly cold-hearted, a daughter capable of destroying her own brother's lifelong happiness over a simple misunderstanding. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the floor, my old instincts screaming at me to pick up the phone. For 32 years, my default setting was to run toward their fires, to explain my boundaries, to calm my mother's rising blood pressure, and to quietly accept just enough unearned blame to keep the family unit from fracturing. But then I replayed Daniel's text in my mind. The one telling me that no one had ever chosen me. Our parents had sharpened that weapon for him. Every single time they asked me to sacrifice my money, my reputation, or my peace, so that he wouldn't have to face the cold reality of his choices. That evening, Mia walked into my apartment carrying a bag of takeout and found me sitting cross-legged on the floor next to an open suitcase. 5 years ago, I had meticulously planned an extensive, beautiful vacation to Bali to celebrate a major corporate promotion I had earned. But just 3 days before my scheduled departure, Daniel's restaurant had completely missed payroll, and our parents had practically begged me on their knees to intervene. I had drained my entire vacation savings account to cover his employees' final checks, watched my travel plans evaporate, and told myself I would simply go later. I never did. Until now. Mia looked at the open suitcase, then down at me. "Are you actually going to do it?" I pulled up my laptop, opened the airline portal, selected a premium flight departing exactly 48 hours before Daniel's rehearsal dinner, and clicked the purchase button. "Yes," I said, a wave of profound relief washing over me. "But before I leave, I'm sending him exactly what he asked for." I didn't mean the $30,000. I didn't mean the legal release, and I certainly didn't mean my grandmother's sapphire bracelet. Daniel had demanded a wedding presentation large enough to publicly prove my unyielding loyalty to his lifestyle. I decided to give him something infinitely more valuable than cash. The unvarnished, documented truth about what he had done. Priya had strictly warned me not to turn an active, delicate criminal fraud case into a reckless, public internet revenge stunt, and I completely agreed with her professionalism. I had no intention of posting accusations on social media, contacting local reporters, or distributing private family records to strangers. Every single item placed inside that wedding gift would be a document Daniel himself had signed, a message he had sent, or a formal legal notice directly relevant to the specific people he was actively deceiving. Daniel had already boastfully announced in the extended wedding family group chat that his incredibly successful sister in finance would be presenting the happy couple with a major family contribution during the reception. He described it as the Cole family's foundational investment in their high society future, and he had explicitly scheduled a public gift presentation slot right between the formal dinner and the cutting of the cake. He was fully expecting a standing ovation. To facilitate this, I ordered a beautiful, heavy, polished walnut document box featuring a custom brass plate engraved with the words, "For the future you built." Inside that box, I carefully arranged a thick black folder. The very first page was a clear, typed letter addressed directly to Daniel. The second page was a certified copy of my federal identity theft affidavit formally denying any authorization of the Cedar and Stone credit line. The third was a copy of the commercial guarantor application displaying the forged signature and the fraudulent corporate ownership structure. The fourth was a formal legal notice demonstrating that his long overdue restaurant loan had been officially referred to a national corporate collections agency. The fifth was a strict litigation hold notice ordering him to preserve every text, email, and financial record connected to his shell company. But beneath those corporate papers lay a securely sealed envelope addressed specifically to his fiancée, Sophie Langford. Because her name appeared as a primary party on several vendor contracts, she possessed an absolute legal right to know exactly how her luxury wedding was being funded. Her envelope contained copies of Daniel's desperate text messages demanding my retroactive approval of his actions, alongside a brief, calm letter explaining that I had never agreed to finance this wedding, erase his debts, or give away our grandmother's jewelry. Accompanying the letter was an encrypted flash drive, prepared entirely by Priya, containing verifiable banking data that Sophie and her family's corporate legal team could instantly authenticate. The final object placed inside the walnut box was the genuine sapphire bracelet, resting securely in its original velvet case beside a certified copy of our grandmother's final will and testament, legally proving its ownership. A brief note attached to the velvet case read, "Sophie, Daniel promised you an heirloom he does not legally own. I am showing it to you now so you understand the profound difference between a gift freely given and property taken through family coercion. The courier delivering this box has strict instructions to return this bracelet directly to my attorney's secure, safe immediately after you have personally reviewed these contents." Attached inside the lid of the polished walnut box was one final card. "You asked me to make things right. I did." The morning I was scheduled to board my flight, I sent one final, brief response to Daniel's original email thread. I typed, "I have received your conditions. I will not be attending the wedding, nor will I complete a single requirement for admission. A wedding invitation does not create a debt, erase an existing loan, transfer inherited property, or give anyone permission to humiliate me. A gift will be delivered directly to the reception. After that, all future financial communication must go through my attorney." His response hit my screen exactly 2 minutes later, overflowing with his usual arrogant certainty. "Stop performing. You're coming." Then, his name began flashing on my screen as he attempted to call me 3 times in immediate succession. I declined every single one. A few minutes later, his voicemail populated my feed. His voice was tight, dropped into that aggressive corporate tone he used whenever a deal was sliding out of his control. "Hannah, this is not one of your office negotiations. You do not get to embarrass me. Mom and Dad have already told everyone in the family that you're attending. Sophie's father thinks your major contribution is arriving this week. Fix your attitude right now and call me." That message was the final piece of the puzzle. It revealed the depth of his desperation. Daniel had already told Sophie's father that my money was guaranteed, using my career credibility to secure his standing with her family. He had trapped himself, and he was counting on my predictable obedience to bail him out one last time. What he didn't know was that Priya had already dispatched a formal limited legal notice to the Langford's corporate company attorney explicitly stating that I disputed all financial obligations and guarantees connected to Cedar and Stone events. The night before my flight, my father appeared unannounced at my apartment door. He stood on the threshold with his arms tightly folded across his chest, staring at me with a look of stern parental disappointment. "You have exactly 24 hours to stop behaving like a victim, Hannah," he said, his voice echoing in the quiet hallway. I looked at him, completely detached from the emotional weight of his presence. "Did you actually read the 5 conditions Daniel sent me, Dad?" He looked away, shifting his weight uneasily. "The specific details don't matter right now. Weddings are incredibly stressful events. Your brother deserves one single weekend without family conflict." "Did you know?" I asked, my voice deadly calm. "That Daniel promised Sophie's father a $30,000 cash transfer from my personal account?" My father's eyes flickered, dropping to the floor. That subtle movement was all the confirmation I ever needed. He knew. They both knew. He sighed, rubbing his forehead before looking back up at me. "Daniel needs the money, Hannah. The Langfords expect our family to participate equally in these expenses. You earn significantly more than he does. Why do you need it so badly anyway? If you have ever had your family ask why you need your own money, your own boundaries, your own reputation, or your own right to say no, while treating an enabled sibling's reckless desires as an absolute urgent emergency, please take a deep breath. I had heard versions of that exact question my entire life. Daniel's needs were always a catastrophic priority. My rights always required an extensive legal justification. I walked over, opened my apartment door fully, and looked at my father. "Leave," I said simply. "Missing this wedding will permanently divide this family, Hannah," he warned, stepping backward into the hallway. "The family was divided every single time you protected him from the consequences of what he did," I answered, my voice steady as I began to close the door. "I am simply no longer standing on the side that gets sacrificed." The next morning, Mia drove me to the international terminal at the airport. As I sat in the passenger seat, my phone began vibrating continuously. Extended relatives were already messaging me because Daniel had posted a message in the family group chat claiming that I had suffered a major, sudden corporate work emergency that might prevent my attendance. He was already aggressively rewriting my absence before my plane had even left the tarmac. I quietly turned off all notifications, checked my passport, and watched my suitcase slide down the conveyor belt. For the very first time in my 32 years of life, I didn't feel like I was running away. I felt like I had finally stopped allowing everyone else to push me backward. When I landed in Denpasar after a grueling series of flights, the wedding weekend was officially 2 days away in California. I checked into a small, deeply peaceful resort nestled outside of Ubud and listened through 23 consecutive voicemails. Most were from my mother, her voice dissolving from demanding anger into sheer panic, stating that Sophie was starting to ask pointed questions about the delayed family contribution, and that Daniel had become entirely impossible to calm down. She begged me to call before he said something he could never take back. Daniel's final message had completely shifted in tone. His voice was soft, cracking with an intense, manipulative vulnerability. "Hannah, please. I'm your brother. Sophie's parents are watching everything this weekend. If this falls apart, I will never recover from the humiliation. Please don't do this to me." Even while begging, he still described the natural consequences of his own corporate forgery as something I was actively doing to him. I forwarded the digital audio files straight to Priya and completely powered down my phone. The following morning, while the high society crowd was gathering at the luxury estate in Napa Valley, I joined a quiet, open-air cooking class surrounded by lush green valley fields outside Ubud. I had almost canceled the excursion because staying alone in my room with my looping thoughts felt completely overwhelming, but the activity forced me into the physical present. While we ground aromatic spices by hand using heavy stone mortars, my hand instinctively kept reaching toward the bag where my phone was hidden. The Balinese instructor noticed my distraction, offered a gentle, knowing smile, and said softly, "You cannot make this food while your mind is somewhere else." He was talking about the recipe, but the truth of his words cut straight through my anxiety. For 2 full hours, I forced my entire focus onto the physical work right in front of me. I didn't feel magically healed or completely at peace. I simply felt present. I had stopped absorbing their chaos across an ocean. When I returned to my resort room that afternoon, I booted up my laptop to check my secure encrypted email account. Sophie had messaged me directly from her personal account. The text was direct, clipped, and heavy with corporate formality. "Hannah, Daniel claims that you formally agreed to provide the $30,000 family contribution weeks ago, and that the bank wire is only delayed because you are throwing a dramatic tantrum over your reception seating assignment. Is this information accurate? My father's corporate accounting team is currently auditing our vendor escrow balances, and they need immediate, official confirmation." Priya had strictly instructed me not to engage in messy emotional accusations, so I typed a completely transparent, factual reply. "Sophie, I never agreed to provide any wedding funds, verbally or in writing. I did not authorize any business loan, line of credit, or personal guarantee for Cedar and Stone Events, LLC. My attorney has already filed formal corporate disputes against the lending documents carrying my name. Please ask Daniel to produce the original physical authorization document he claims I signed." Sophie didn't reply to my email, but an hour later, the digital dam broke across the ocean. Daniel attempted to call my powered-down phone 12 times in a row, and my mother called 9 times. My father sent a single, terrifyingly brief email. "Whatever malicious lie you just told Sophie, contact her and undo it right now." Later that evening, Mia messaged me via a secure chat application. Several of my extended cousins, completely horrified by what was unfolding in real time, had begun forwarding screenshots from the private wedding guest group chat. Even though the entire foundation of his finances was cracking, Daniel's arrogance was boundless. He had shifted the reception schedule slightly, but he had kept the public gift presentation fully intact. He had pinned a message telling the 200 guests that I was traveling across the world for a confidential, high-level corporate finance transition, but that my massive family blessing would be presented right on schedule. Mia typed, "Hannah, the courier is holding the walnut box at the venue office, waiting for our final digital release signal. We can cancel the delivery right now if you want. The bank's fraud investigation will still proceed privately, and Sophie will eventually get the truth through corporate lawyers weeks from now. You can walk away without becoming the public villain in every single story your parents tell for the next 20 years. Then, Mia copied and pasted one final message that Daniel had just posted to the entire guest list. "My sister Hannah understands that true family loyalty always comes before petty personal feelings. Tomorrow night, everyone in this room will see exactly how much she supports our new beginning." He was doing it again. He was aggressively using my forced absence and my silence as automatic consent to validate his grand illusion. He was banking on the fact that even if I hated him, I would never allow our parents to be publicly humiliated in a room full of California elites. I leaned back against the cool white wall of my Balinese resort room, watching the ceiling fan spin slowly. If you have ever realized that your family relies on your absolute discretion to protect their beautiful lies, type the word truth in the comments right now, because that is the moment the spell breaks. Don't cancel it, I texted back to Mia, my hands perfectly calm. Let the courier release the box. On the morning of the wedding day, my mother sent one final text. Daniel just announced to Sophie's family that your gift is large, enough to cover the down payment on a new home in Los Gatos. Thank you for finally doing the right thing, Hannah. We love you. Minutes later, Sophie's name popped up on my email feed again. She had attached a scanned PDF file. It was the Cedar and Stone commercial guarantor form. Daniel just showed me this, she wrote, her digital tone noticeably trembling. He swears your signature is real and that your compliance attorney is just creating unnecessary confusion because you suddenly regret the financial scale of the gift. Hannah, I am looking at the ink. Is this signature yours? Priya reviewed the exchange in real time and approved a single-word response. I typed, no. Sophie's final message arrived almost instantly, understood. I spent the rest of that monumental day completely disconnected from my phone, walking slowly through the ancient terraced green rice fields outside of Ubud. As I watched the local farmers work the land with a patient, rhythmic devotion, a profound realization washed over me. For my entire adult life, I had treated my own intense anxiety as a moral obligation. Whenever Daniel caused a catastrophic financial crisis, the person who worried the most automatically became the person responsible for fixing it. I had confused my deep psychological conditioning with familial love. By the time the tropical sun began to dip below the volcanic horizon, I finally understood that guilt is not always a warning that you are doing something wrong. Sometimes, guilt is simply a well-worn habit taught to you by people who benefit entirely from your absolute obedience. The formal wedding ceremony in Napa Valley occurred while I was quietly eating dinner at a small wooden table in Ubud. I didn't try to find a live stream link, and I didn't check social media tags. According to the detailed timeline Mia text dumped to me later, Daniel and Sophie successfully exchanged vows at the altar, but the atmosphere was completely suffocating. Sophie appeared incredibly tense in every bridal photo, and she abruptly walked out of the formal portrait session 30 minutes early. Her father spent the entirety of the cocktail hour pacing the manicured lawns, glued to his phone. The commercial lender's fraud department had officially contacted his corporate company counsel that very morning. But Daniel, wrapped in a blanket of delusion so thick it defied logic, still fully believed that my walnut box would arrive and magically rescue him from the edge of the cliff. At exactly 8:14 p.m. California time, the heavy engraved polished walnut box was hand-delivered directly into the grand reception hall. The courier's secure digital signature confirmation went straight to Priya's office phone. Daniel, seeing the beautiful box arrive, immediately had the venue staff place a live microphone right next to the central gift presentation table. He tapped the mic, clearing his throat, ready to receive the admiration he had spent a lifetime stealing. Daniel stood confidently before the crowd of 200 guests, gesturing toward the polished walnut box with a brilliant, practiced smile. He began giving an expansive, emotional speech about the vital importance of siblings, the beauty of family forgiveness, and the sacred obligation of supporting one another's loftiest dreams. He explicitly told the silent room that although his highly successful sister couldn't attend due to an urgent corporate conflict, this surprise presentation proved our family was finally ready to move forward into a glorious new chapter together. He then grandly invited Sophie and her parents to stand directly beside him at the microphone. I was fast asleep in Bali when the rest of the night unfolded. Later, I would reconstruct the exact timeline of the explosion from a series of frantic witness accounts, a partial cell phone video recorded by a horrified cousin, and a cascade of desperate voicemails. Daniel proudly lifted the heavy lid of the box, admiring the custom brass engraving, and offered a deep, satisfied bow. The room politely applauded. He reached inside, eagerly expecting to pull out a massive family check or a certified bank wire confirmation. Instead, his fingers brushed against the crisp edge of the thick, black folder. He opened it, and the very first page stared back at him on the live microphone. It began, "Daniel, you gave me 5 conditions for attending your wedding. Here is the only condition under which I will remain a part of your life. You will never use my name, my money, my signature, my property, or my silence ever again." The witness video showed Daniel's brilliant smile vanish so fast it looked like a physical blow. His face went completely white. He panicked, trying to slam the folder closed before anyone else could look. But Sophie had already stepped forward. Her sharp eyes immediately caught the words Cedar and Stone Events, LLC printed in bold. Across the next visible page, she reached out and firmly pulled the folder from his hands. Daniel snatched it back, laughing nervously, and told the microphone that it was just a private, affectionate family inside joke. Then, the sealed envelope with Sophie's name written on it slid out onto the linen tablecloth. She snatched it up before he could physically stop her. By the time Sophie reached the second page of my letter, the entire ballroom had descended into a suffocating, absolute silence. She didn't scream, and she didn't cry. That cold, quiet composure made the scene infinitely more devastating. She stood rigidly by the presentation table, methodically reading through the forged commercial guarantee documents, while Daniel frantically whispered in her ear, claiming that the papers were being completely taken out of context. Sophie's father stepped forward, his voice cutting through the room. "Did Hannah sign this, Daniel?" Daniel cracked. He claimed that I had verbally approved the entire credit line months ago, and that I was now maliciously using a minor legal technicality to punish him because I was unstable and bitter about money. But that desperate explanation instantly failed. He had spent the entire wedding weekend bragging about my high-level financial brilliance to establish his own credibility with her family. He couldn't have it both ways. Sophie's father didn't argue. He walked away, picked up his phone, and dialed his company's chief legal counsel. When Daniel aggressively tried to grab Sophie's phone to stop her from reading my texts, she stepped back and told him loudly, over the live microphone, never to touch her again. Our mother rushed the table, desperately trying to pacify the situation, telling the guests that siblings sign documents for one another all the time and accusing me of being a vindictive monster. But then Sophie pulled out Daniel's text message, ordering me to sign the release and transfer the $30,000. Reading it aloud to her parents. When Daniel insisted the message was a fabricated edit, Sophie's father told him to unlock his personal phone and show the original conversation thread. Daniel flatly refused. That final refusal completely destroyed whatever remained of his manufactured life. The high society reception didn't end in a massive theatrical shouting match. It systematically unraveled through a series of undeniable truths that Daniel could no longer gaslight his way out of. Sophie quietly walked out of the ballroom with her mother and her bridesmaids, never to return. Her father remained locked in a private conference room with his attorney. The formal speeches were abruptly canceled. The live band stopped playing after a single awkward set, and the massive wedding cake remained entirely untouched in the corner. When I powered on my phone in Bali the next morning, I had 41 missed calls and a flood of texts. My father's initial voicemails were furious, ordering me to tell Sophie that the walnut box was a cruel, malicious prank. But by voicemail 6, his anger had transformed into sheer, trembling terror. The commercial lender had contacted him too. Daniel hadn't just forged my name. He had listed our parents as secondary investors using a preliminary paper they had blindly signed for a venue reservation to attach a fraudulent backup security claim against their own home equity. I sent my father a single text message: "Speak to an independent attorney. Do not destroy any records. All future communication with me must go through Priya." By the time I returned to California 12 days later, the fallout had spread far beyond that ruined Napa ballroom. Sophie successfully filed for a total annulment based on fraud and misrepresentation. Her father's firm immediately terminated Daniel from his executive position. The lender officially froze the Cedar and Stone accounts, completely cleared my name as a guarantor, and referred the grand forgery over to federal criminal investigators. Priya launched a comprehensive civil action. Frozen assets were traced, and Daniel was forced to watch his luxury lifestyle completely evaporate. Our parents initially wanted to mortgage their house to save him, until their own lawyer uncovered an email Daniel had sent to a lender stating, "My parents sign whatever I put in front of them." That single sentence finally broke their delusion. Daniel didn't see any of us as family. He saw us as resources to be consumed. The legal process dragged on for nearly a year, ultimately ending in Daniel accepting a serious criminal plea agreement involving corporate forgery and fraudulent use of identifying data. He avoided active prison time due to a clean record, but he received heavy supervised probation, hundreds of hours of community service, mandatory financial ethics counseling, and lost his condo, his sports car, and his entire social standing. My relationship with my parents was permanently altered. When we finally met in a quiet restaurant months later, I didn't let them make excuses. They finally admitted that they had trained me to manage Daniel's disasters, and trained Daniel to expect that management. They admitted that calling me the strong one had just been a convenient way to demand more sacrifices from me. I established absolute, unmovable boundaries. They are never allowed to bring up his financial life, or the rules are enforced, and the conversation instantly ends. I recovered most of my original $84,000 loan through the forced liquidation of Daniel's remaining assets. The money mattered, but the formal legal judgment stating that the debt was real mattered infinitely more. Sometimes, people ask me if I regret sending that walnut box to the reception hall. I do regret that Sophie had to learn the devastating truth about her life in front of 200 guests, and I told her that privately. We aren't close friends, but we share a deep, quiet, mutual respect. But Daniel chose the public microphone. He chose the audience. He wanted public applause for a life built on my destruction, and I simply allowed accurate, certified documents to speak in the exact room where he planned to use my silence as his ultimate currency. Saying no to family manipulation is not a betrayal. Protecting your own future is not an act of revenge. Sometimes, it is simply the very first act of your true freedom.